Hello and welcome back to another episode of League Talk. Today we have something ever so slightly different. I'm not going to go through something to do with sports psychology and sports science, sports coaching, although it does have a bit of backing in that. Today's going to be a bit more of a response to something. Now, I've been watching a load of content recently, and more specifically, I've watched episode 30 of Listen Loco. And I heard some opinions on that were slightly polarising to me, something I didn't necessarily agree with. But to preface this, I think the content that Loco makes is absolutely fantastic. Him and Thorin are brilliant. I think that Listen Loco has been amazing. It's been something that I've tuned into an awful lot. But in this scenario, I certainly agree with Weldon, and Thorin, I think, was sort of on Weldon's side a bit more than he was on Loco's. But I agree with Weldon and Thorin in this situation more than Loco. I guess this content is sort of a defence video for CLG and their decision for the 10-man roster, because it has come under quite a lot of fire of recent. But I have no affiliation with CLG or anything like that, and I'm not actually a fan of CLG, if that makes sense. Whilst I think they're a great organisation, and I think they're doing a lot of really good things this split, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of them as such, if that makes sense. I don't have anything against them, nor do I have anything really for them. But to be honest, I am a huge fan of Weldon. I've consumed his content for at least 2 years now and think the way that he's building CLG is going to be fantastic for them. And I think if anyone can achieve this 10-man roster and the success that comes with it, I think it will be someone like him, if not him, with the background that he has. Basically the opinions of Loco were that the 10-man roster was BS, and he didn't necessarily agree with the things that Weldon had been saying and CLG had been promising in the past, and weren't necessarily leading up to it and really going for the things that they were saying. So the first section will be all about the 10-man roster generally and the benefits of it. Now, obviously, my opinions come from traditional sports, so most of this is set in traditional sports because I firmly believe that the 10-man roster is a really positive thing if done properly. And I think, as I said earlier, if anyone can do it, I think Weldon is someone that can. Now, the 10-man roster isn't used an awful lot in Western esports. We'll go into a little bit about that, but noticeably, however, Korea has really started pushing the 10-man roster more recently, and this season, for example, KT, SKT, Afrika Freaks, Hanwha Life, and Sandbox all have 10-man rosters, and Damwon Gaming has a 9-man roster. In the NALCS, Optic have talked a little bit about their 10-man roster. It would appear that there are 5 main starters now, and CLG, the other one, obviously, who have been a real proponent of the 10-man roster, or the only ones that talk about it at least. All of the teams do have academy slots, so theoretically, the 10-man roster is in play. It depends how much they utilise it, however. In the LEC, the only team that really has a 10-man roster or has spoken about a 10-man roster is XL. And I've had Ferndog, Josh Furno, and John Ellis on the podcast, who both work for XL Esports. Ferndog's the head coach, and then John Ellis is the performance coach. And if you're interested in those, I'll put the links in the description. You can see what they have to say about the 10-man roster. It was really, really interesting couple of podcasts on there, and you see some of the benefits that they spoke about and why it's going to be great for them in the LEC and the UKLC. For traditional sports, however, it's undeniable how beneficial the 10-man roster is. And the main reason, to be brutally honest, is because of substitutions and injuries. It's really important to have backups because of injuries, because in traditional sports it's quite common to be injured, even if it's little niggles. Now, of course, this doesn't happen much in esports, but it can happen. If we look at Grig and Arcadian at the moment, Grig, the TSM jungler, or who was originally supposed to be the TSM jungler, the starting TSM jungler, had some wrist issues, and Arcadian has stepped in. So, of course, this is of benefit in that scenario as well. However, it's not really the main point. And there are 2 main points and 1 side point that I'd really like to sort of chat about, and think that in esports is really, really important and can contribute to the huge success of a 10-man roster. So the first point that I want to bring up is competition. Now, the competition for place is a huge, huge motivator for a lot of people. And by that I mean just the starting position. So in Korea, it's understood, I believe, that people are interchangeable. So if you're not playing super well, there are a bunch of different people who can step into that position that you were in and succeed in that. But The drive to make yourself a better person and a better player when you aren't playing for the first team is huge. The want to achieve the starting role is a real drive, short-term, medium-term, or even a long-term goal. Therefore, players who are substitutes and are striving and pushing themselves to get better to take the spot will be driving, and that will be the motivator for them. They will be motivated to try and take that starting spot. The other side of that coin is if you're starting, you want to stay on top. And it's going to push you constantly to improve. So the two players theoretically grow together. They're both pushing each other to be better and better. Obviously, the difficulty with this is to ensure that you have the right type of person who can handle this type of pressure, this type of environment. The players need to have a constant growth mindset. In the business world, it's called CPD, continuous professional development or continuous personal development, and this is something that needs to be employed in esports in order for this ideology to work. And they need to have a vision for the future. This can't be a short-term goal. It can't be a short-term mindset. They need to be improving themselves as a player and improving the team, and that goes hand in hand. The worry about this idea, however, is the idea of benching. And now this is really frowned upon in esports, and it's not really perceived as negatively in traditional sports as it is in esports. And benching can destroy your motivation and can destroy your attitude, which is somewhat confusing because the reality of it is you want to get your first place back, your starting roster back. So when you're benched, idealistically, you're looking to achieve the position that you were in. So you build up, you motivate, you perform in the best way you can to get that position back. So if, and hopefully when, we move out of that mindset in esports, it will be so beneficial. But that's the first point is competition and how important competition can be to improve, to motivate, and to achieve success. The internal competition of fighting for your place is going to be really important. I think that's something that CLG have hopefully been doing a really good job of, because in the first couple of weeks, whilst they are on the 5-man roster, or the 5-man starting roster now, it would appear, there was a bit of chop and change. And Weldon actually said on the Listen Loco episode that there is weekly assessment, so it could change from today to next week, though the roster could be completely different. But the second point that I wanted to touch on was perspective. Now, perspective is something that I think is one of the best things to happen in conversation. Communication, as long as it's positive and brings perspective, can be massive. And the same in conflict. We did an episode on the podcast a while ago about conflict and how conflict can be really good if dealt with in the right way, because it can offer perspective. Now, perspective, what does that mean? The basic premise of it is bouncing ideas off each other, right? Now, this is something that also has to be bought into, as it seems unproductive, right? You know, Meteos, who's the current jungler for Optic, spoke about how this academy system, he doesn't really like it because he's giving information to the person that wants to take his job and wants to take his place. But when the players are bought into this and bought into winning as a team and playing as a team, then obviously this is a positive thing if you can give each other information. And by that I mean if you have two mid laners, one starting, one substitute, then that's going to be the information shared, and the different perspectives are going to be really important. So discussion, debate, consultation, however you want to describe it, these are all wonderful ways to improve simply through offering perspective. Everyone has different ideas, and assuming that your idea is right just because it's in your head and it's the only one you can think of is really short-sighted and really close-minded. It's simple-minded as well. An example of this, really simply, could be that the starting top laner is really aggressively pushing. He's always been an aggressive top laner. So from minute 1 to minute 30, he hard pushes the waves and pushes the opposition top laner under the tower. Now, another top laner may look at that, and this could be the substitute top laner, and say, well, why don't you ward at minute 2 just to guard against a gank, so when you are pushing and when you are taking priority, then you can see if the jungler is coming to gank you. And then you can play more aggressively throughout because you know potentially where the jungler is or isn't. Now, obviously, that's a really simple example and there's loads of workarounds for that. But that perspective could change the starting top laner's whole playstyle. It could be brilliant for him because he now goes, oh my goodness, at 2 minutes if I ward, I now don't give over first blood. That perspective change is really key. So this bouncing of ideas and general discussion on matchups or what's strong at the moment, what's a priority pick, what's in meta, can be helping the team and therefore doesn't necessarily need the input of a coach in that scenario. So that's another great thing about this, is it gives over, I can't remember the right word at the moment, but where you give responsibilities to other people and the coach can give the responsibilities of talking over that game or talking about matchups or talking about the meta in that current role to the substitute and the starting mid laner, which is brilliant because then the coach can focus on some other things as well. Obviously, you don't want to give complete control to players in an ideal world, but that is one other way to think about it. And then the last point that I want to talk about is what I call the Afrika effect. So this is a term that I coined basically to explain Afrika Freaks 2018 season and the tactic going into that whole season and going into Worlds. Excuse me. They basically hid a bunch of tactics from oppositions by internally scrimming. They did very little external scrims, so they didn't necessarily scrim against SKT or KT or Griffin, whoever. They didn't necessarily scrim against these people because they did it internally because of their 10-man roster. You basically therefore have the ability to hide picks, to hide your champion priority in draft, to choose drafts as well, which is a huge thing. So you might want to put one team at a disadvantage through draft. You might want to see what Yasuo's like in the current meta, or to try something really weird like an interesting level 1 path and an invade. So by not giving away information in scrims, much like no one does in traditional sports, might I add, where there's very few practice games where Arsenal go and play Chelsea in Arsenal Stadium with no fans. It's always, unless it's off-season, there's a couple of friendlies here and there, but there's always games that matter, and there's no scrims like there is in esports. So that idea of hiding things can be really, really important. This is something that XL were talking about with their internal scrims, and that was on the podcast that will be linked below again. One issue with this, however, is that your subs need to be of high enough standard to make that practice useful. You don't want to be practicing 10 hours with a bunch of guys who are plat when you're challenger, for example. However, to rebut this, your subs don't need to be as good necessarily as the teams you're playing against, but they just need to be good enough to be able to draw the benefits out of this ideology, whilst you could be scrimming other teams as well. So maybe you think in the current meta, Jack's jungle is really, really good. But you don't want to give away that you think Jack's jungle is really good, and you don't want to be able to go into the stage game on the Saturday, the Sunday, the Wednesday, the Thursday if you're in the UK, and get that banned and have people bringing up picks against that and counter picks. You might want to have it as a surprise. So that could be a scenario where you don't give information away and it's a wholly positive idea. And you've drawn all the benefits out of internally scrimming whilst also scrimming against other teams. They just don't know what you've got to hide because you haven't given that away. So those are the three sort of like main points. It's the competition for place as a real motivator and one to bring success. It's perspective, to be able to give different ideas, to bounce ideas, to just chat about what's going on in the game, and the Afrika effect of being able to hide things. Now, the issues I had with this viewpoint that I mentioned earlier, the one about the 10-man roster just not being something that's actually really useful or has necessarily happened, I think is more of the point that they were trying to put across in that discussion. I don't know if they necessarily had that as their opinion in Listen Loco, but the above points seem to be ignored if that's your opinion on it. If you're not swapping out 5 players each week, or you're not swapping out a player each week, therefore the 10-man roster isn't, reasonable. I don't blame anyone for seeing it this way because it's not blatantly obvious what a 10-man roster could do. Maybe I got the wrong end of the stick, that is quite likely, but I believe this to be a viewpoint, even if it's not necessarily pulled from this video of Listen Loco episode 30, which I'll also put in the description if you guys want to watch that. But it is so easy to forget the unseen positives of competition, discussion, strategy, and hiding, like strategically hiding things. As Fallen Bandit hasn't started top since week 2, and therefore there's not a 10-man roster for CLG. That is an opinion. However, to therefore assume that the 10-man roster isn't necessarily in play isn't fair, in my opinion. Weldon talks about how tilted Darshan was. and how they had to sub him out to simply untilt him, and that's one of the reasons why Fallen Bandit came into the squad. And this shows another unforeseen positive, because people just go, oh, Fallen Bandit must have played better this week, which isn't necessarily the case. In this scenario, Darshan was very tilted, he wasn't in the right mindset to be able to play the game, especially on stage, so they subbed him out. And then Thorin lays out exactly what was promised, and that was the communication of the weekly assessment to find out who will be playing in the LCS. And again, for fans to assume that therefore this doesn't happen because the same 5 players are playing doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, the thing not to forget, and I think this is where CLG are at the moment, is if you have a winning formula and results matter, that's the real caveat there, and results matter, then putting forward your safest bet for a victory is really important. I'm sure if results didn't matter, we might see CLG chopping and changing. If they were 10-0 and they've made it to playoffs, and that's great, they might be utilising their 10-man roster more on stage. You might see a Fallen Bandit, you might see Auto in AD carry, who knows? In traditional sports it's difficult because friendlies exist, where the outcome isn't overly important, but moreover this season is significantly shorter than a traditional sports season, so those in traditional sports can experiment more. But the final thing that I wanted to chat about before concluding is about funding. So in the UKLC, Phelan Gaming use a 10-man roster, and they're the only team in the UKLC, apart from XL, who have the academy team. So it is possible with little funding, because the UKLC hasn't got loads and loads of funding. But of course, the funding to achieve a 10-man roster can be difficult and may cause people to slip up in other places, such as content. They might not be producing a bunch of content. But this may be played a factor into CLG not getting someone like Flame in the top lane, or someone else. I know they were looking at EU top laners, per se. But the talk is that Flame was demanding a lot of money, so they couldn't go ahead with the deal, which is, that's fine. But it's just another little caveat about the 10-man roster. Something that isn't necessarily really positive about it is if you don't have the right funding for it, maybe it's not the right thing to do. But, however, to conclude, the 10-man roster is something that I strongly, strongly believe in, and I think it will be in the future of esports, whether you like it or not. I think it's something that's going to happen. And then the benefits of the 10-man roster that we discussed, a competition perspective and the Afrika effect, and these are all things that aren't seen really obviously on stage. So the whole premise of this was the response to the idea of CLG don't have a 10-man roster because they're playing the same 5 players, which, as I said, I do understand, but these are the points that I put forward to show that it's not necessarily something that's so blatantly obvious as one week it's Darshan top, the next it's Fallen Bandit. And I especially think that when they have a winning formula, which they do at the moment, they're doing relatively well, and there's a lot of criticism of how they're playing and things like that, but a win's a win at the end of the day. Once you've got that winning formula, then sticking to it for the safest bet when results matter is clearly the right thing to be doing. But there's a lot of stuff we just don't know. Behind closed doors, CLG might be loving the 10-man roster. It might be brilliant. Who knows? There's not information that we have available. So that was the video. That was the response to a couple of opinions I've seen. And it's not just Loco's opinion. It might not even be Loco's opinion. He might have just been saying it for the sake of the piece of content. But I know it is an opinion of some people. And I just wanted to dispel some of those ideas because it's something that I strongly believe in, and therefore wanted to back wholeheartedly, especially when I'm from traditional sports, coaching and development in that scenario. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it made a bunch of sense. Maybe we'll see some 10-man rosters in the future. If you found this interesting and you want to have a discussion with me, you're more than welcome to find me at leaguE Talk Show. So it's changed now. It's no longer leaguE Talk Blog. It's leaguE Talk Show. This whole leaguE Talk thing did start off as a blog, but now it's podcast, it's audio, written, and video content. So that's the best place to find me on Twitter at leaguE Talk Show, or you can find me on Instagram at league_talk. Instagram's becoming something where I'm sort of putting the things that I teach on here into practice and showing how that happens in short little Instagram stories. So if you're interested in that, hit me up, give me a follow, and I'm more than welcome. I'm more than happy, and I more than welcome it to have a discussion around some of the things we say. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I will speak to you next time.